A lot of debate going on in the world of professional wrestling this week with the IWC because PWI released their top 100 tag teams of the past year, and it went to the Usos. So again, for those, there's a lot of debate on this. Should it have been the Usos? Should it have been FTR? Couple things to point out here. First off, the evaluation period was between October 1st, 2021 and September 30th, 2022. So it's not the entire 2022 year. It's a little bit of the end of the 2021 year. Also, the criteria for it includes in-ring achievement, influence of the sport, technical ability, quality of competition, and activity. And I think you could make a strong argument for either the Usos or FTR. So, Ralph, I have a feeling you're going to pick the Usos, correct?
In terms of who I think should have won, yeah, I would say the Usos. That doesn't mean I think they're the better tag team.
Right.
But the criteria is very specific for this.
Right. And we took it to the Babel section and put that to a vote to say who should have topped the list. And 66% said FTR over the Usos. So
go figure.
I'm going to go with the IWC on this. And I'm going to do something the IWC hasn't really done per se. And that is actually make the case for FTR topping the list over the Usos. Because typically what it's been is FTR is the best tag team. They should be the top of the list. Or they go to, well, they had their matches with the Briscoes. They won their 3 championships. They should win over the Usos. And that is really the argument. And it's a very vague argument. But Ralph, I'm going to try to make this argument a little bit stronger for the IWC. I'm going to do a solid for them. First and foremost, I think we do have to put into consideration the fact that they did win 3 championships and held on to them for primarily most of that evaluation period, obviously holding the AAA Tag Team Championships for that entire year. You also have them winning the Ring of Honor Championships back in April and the IWGP Tag Team Championships at Forbidden Door. So they won all of them and held them for a significant portion of that time in the evaluation period. Obviously, influence on the sport. I think most would agree they are at least one of, if not the best tag team in professional wrestling today. And everyone wants dream matches with them. You name a tag team, they want to have a match with FTR, and FTR wants to work a tag team match with them, whether it's the Motor City Machine Guns or Aussie Open or even the Usos, whoever the case may be. They all want to work with FTR at this point.
How do you define influence of the sport, and how do you not consider the Usos and their storyline with the Bloodline and everything else as influencing pro wrestling and having probably the best storyline we've seen, at least in WWE and maybe throughout the whole year? Did you take that into consideration? And I'm just asking because, again, I don't know if there's a right or wrong for this. I could go probably either way.
I think when PWI made the decision, that definitely went into their favor for influence on the sport or promotion because they are the top tag team in the number 1 promotion in the world. As much as people want to disagree with that statement, numbers speak for themselves. WWE is the number 1 wrestling promotion in the world. I agree, the Usos definitely have influence on the sport, but to their discredit per se, is that influence only because of Roman Reigns and they're tied to Roman Reigns. If you take Roman Reigns out of the equation, do they have that same influence? And a lot of people can make the debate, no.
I'm just asking because I would assume for those who are going to make a case for the Usos, and I think you can make a case for them or FTR, I would imagine they're going to probably bring up the fact that they are in the Bloodline. And I think that's a totally valid argument or leg to stand on that would validate them being, at least considered in that top spot. So
how do you hold the fact that FTR, a lot of people consider them the best tag team in pro wrestling versus the Usos being the top tag team in the top promotion with the top storylines? How do you weigh that into each other for that specific criteria of sports and influence and all that nature? Now you have quality of opponent. I actually had to do a deep dive on this because obviously when you look at the top 20 or whatever, you have the Usos in the top 20 only beat 2 of those teams that were in the top 20. One was RK Bro and the others were the Street Profits. When you look at FTR, they beat the Briscoes twice, and they were number 3. They beat the Young Bucks. They beat Hermanos Lee for the AAA Tag Team Championships. So that's 3 right there. They beat the United Kingdom. So that's 4. So, and I'm sure I'm missing some right there. So at least 4 in the evaluation period. That's already double what the Usos did in that evaluation period against top 20 teams. And the other thing too, they were similar as far as traditional tag team matches. The Usos had 28 matches versus FTR's 25. FTR lost 5 matches this year. All 5 of those were in AEW. Outside of AEW, they were undefeated. The Usos lost 9 times this year. You wouldn't think that because they never lost the SmackDown Tag Team Championships, but they lost a lot of contenders matches, a lot of non-title matches, and they also lost to some tag teams that weren't necessarily called tag teams per se. Their most recent loss, which happened back in August, I believe, was against the team of Drew McIntyre and Madcap Moss. Does that kind of go against the Usos' resume that, yeah, they done all this stuff and they beat all these tag teams, but they also lost to teams that weren't necessarily tag teams?
I think the biggest thing to point out is just the dynamic in comparing the promotion for which FTR works for and what they're allowed to do, pretty much compete outside of AEW. Mm-hmm. And the fact that WWE is absolutely, without a doubt, hands down, story-driven first. Like, right. It has to have a story. With AEW, like, yes, of course, FTR is going to have more prominent wins over all of those tag teams that you listed. Are those better tag teams? They're probably better by comparison if you were going to say, compile a list of the top tag teams that, you know, the IWC would consider top tier tag teams. And because of the dynamic where FTR is allowed to compete outside of AEW, of course they're going to face those tag teams. The Usos, you're going to get a lot of those matches. They are probably going to lose more because a lot of those losses probably helped progress storylines and everything else. So I don't know if that means one is better than the other. I think for this specific criteria that you're talking about would help them. But I think if anything, when thinking about this list, because I'm sure we're going to get to this at some point, if you were to ask anybody why they felt like FTR wasn't the top tag team in the world this past year, what is everybody gonna point to? And I think the elephant in the room is the fact that I don't think this was Tony Khan's best year booking. Mm-hmm. I think he put them on the back burner. I think they're a shoo-in. They should win this mostly every year.
Yes.
Usos would probably be in the top 5, if not number 2, if FTR had been utilized better on AEW's flagship show on Dynamite. Unfortunately, they were put on the back burner for much of it.
Yeah, I agree. You know, the booking of FTR and AEW has not been good. As I mentioned, their 5 losses were all in AEW. 2 of those, I will say, were battle royals. So could we really count them as losses against them? So if you take those out, it's only 3 losses the entire year, and all of them being in AEW. I think 2 of them were AEW tag team title matches as well. In those losses, I think shenanigans got in the way of them actually winning those matches. So a lot of protective booking for FTR, even in losses. But I will agree with you. There was that huge chunk of time where they were the number 1 ranked tag team and didn't even get an AEW tag team championship match. And for anybody that wants to try to defend the rankings and the ranking system in AEW, FTR is the reason AEW stopped using rankings. Okay, so there's influence on the sport right there, or influence on the promotion. They forced them to stop using a ranking system, which kept them separate from any other promotion in professional wrestling, because Tony Khan just could not find a reason not to put FTR out of number 1 and not give them a title shot after 5 months of being at that spot. The fact that we're having this conversation that they're number 2 was in spite of Tony Khan's bad booking.
Absolutely.
Had they gotten the AEW tag team titles, we're not having this discussion. They are the number 1 tag team. But because of the inconsistent booking from Tony Khan, and I think that has a huge influence in most people's eyes, especially in the American market, and those at PWI, that went against them. Some will try to say, you know what? Forget that. We understand, but FTR still won 3 championships. They still had match of the year contenders. People still consider them the best tag team, regardless of how Tony Khan booked them. And if you do the deep dive like I did as far as wins and losses, they had a better record this year than the Usos, regardless of the fact that they had the SmackDown tag team titles the entire evaluation period. So if you want to say FTR should have topped that list, go with my argument. Don't just go by FTR had those great matches with the Briscoes. FTR won those 3 titles. Break it down a little deeper, guys. Do your homework for the sake of the debate. But if you just go by the Briscoes matches and the Aussie Open match, which, by the way, that Aussie Open match wasn't even part of the evaluation period. It missed it by 1 damn day. Then start making the conversation about FTR. I think if you say the Usos, you're not wrong. If you say FTR, you're also not wrong. So Babble section, let us know what you guys think. Who is the best tag team from this past year during the evaluation period? I know we already had the vote, but for those new to the channel, let us know.